Hey friends, this is episode 2 of The Fairy Tale Thief. If you haven't listened to episode 1, I suggest that you do that. If you'd like to read the entire story, it's free. The e-copy is free on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Kobo or any of the online booksellers sites. And as I mentioned in the introduction to episode 1, I am considering writing the sequels to both The Fairy Tale Thief and The Invisible Maid, but I haven't decided which one I want to write yet. So if you have an opinion, I would love to hear it. You can leave it in the comments. If you like the story, please consider subscribing and liking it and encouraging your friends. The Invisible Maid, the other story that I'm considering writing the sequels to, is available on the Kindle Vella platform. The first 3 episodes are free as well. And it's not like I'm playing favorites. I am not able to read The Invisible Maid because it is committed to the Kindle Vella platform. So I don't know which one I'm going to start working on next, but it's between these two. So here we go. Episode 2 of The Fairy Tale Thief. Hey, he called out, rising from his seat to peer at Grace over the windshield. Rude, the girl beside him said. Grace didn't reply. She didn't even look back. She had thought maybe she'd feel better after the car kicking, but she didn't. Anger at everyone and everything settled between her shoulder blades like an itch she couldn't scratch. She started looking for something else deserving of a swift kick. But Santa Magdalena remained perfect. Perfect weather, perfect landscaping, perfect people. Minutes later, Grace pulled her bike around to the back of the lilac shop and knocked on the alley entrance door so hard that her knuckles hurt. A tall, regal-looking man with ebony-colored skin and grizzled hair answered. His gaze swept over her. I'm Grace, she told him, blinking up at him. And I'm Ernest, he said in a voice that sounded deep and rich like James Earl Jones. Do you work here too? Grace asked, struck by the coincidence of 2 employees having names used to describe virtues. He murmured yes and held the door open. Do you want to bring your bike inside? No one will steal it, Grace replied as she propped the 1965 Schwinn Cruiser up to the trash can bin. It looked like it belonged there. Ernest didn't argue with her. The back of the room of the lilac shop was impulsively full of knickknacks and whatevers. Queen Anne-style chairs hung from the ceiling. Blown glass vases and curios lined the shelves, and a rack of vintage clothes stood in a corner. Despite the chaos, it was still somehow beautiful. Grace followed Ernest to the rack of clothes where he paused. Cordelia has requested that you wear this. He pulled out a green taffeta dress. Grace didn't know what to say, so she stared at him. She had never had to change her clothes when she worked at the dairy, except for when she got home, of course. Think of it as a uniform, Ernest said, balancing the hanger on his pointy finger. Grace's gaze went from his face to the dress and back to his face. Do you have to wear a uniform? A smile played on his lips. But there's nothing in the ship. There's nothing in the shop that will fit me. Grace held out her hand in protest. How do you know this will fit me? He didn't roll his eyes, but he might as well have. There are matching shoes. He gestured toward a pair of green silk pumps bedazzled with faux emeralds sitting on a table beside the clothes rack. I'll look like a leprechaun. But an employed leprechaun, Ernest said. True. Grace sat down on a settee, tugged off her boots, and slipped one of the green shoes on. It fit perfectly. She held out her foot, inspecting the shoe. It was ridiculous, funky, and fabulous all at the same time. She eyed the dress. Okay, I'll do it, Grace said, plucking the hanger off of Ernest's finger. He pointed at a dressing room. Grace felt more than saw him grin. Behind the rose velvet curtain, Grace stepped out of her jeans and tugged her t-shirt over her head. The The dress floated around her and skimmed the tops of her knees. She studied her reflection in a large gilded mirror. The green dress made her eyes bluer, her lips redder, and her cheeks pinker. Even her nearly black hair glistened. Grace heard whispering as if someone agreed with her. Glancing around, she searched for the source of the noise. Outside a small window, the wind whistled. She shook away the being watched feeling, pushed back the curtain, and went to find Ernest. In the showroom, he stood behind the sales counter. His gaze met hers, and he held out his hand, revealing a ribbon resting in his palm. Deciding it was better than a hairnet, Grace plucked the ribbon out of his palm and returned to the dressing room. The whispering sound continued, but this time she ignored it. With her hair tied up, she looked like she was going to a tea party. But that must have been what Ernest had in mind, because his eyes gleamed with approval when she returned. Your job, quite simply, is to be as decorative as the lovely things we sell, Ernest told her. I don't consider myself to be very decorative, Grace told him, smoothing down the dress with both hands. This is your job, Ernest asked. Do you want it? Well, yeah. Consider yourself a piece of the crockery. Crockery? Really? Where's Cordelia? Grace asked. There had to be more to this job. She'll be here momentarily, Ernest said. Let me give you the tour. He taught her how to use the cash register, showed her where to find the key for the jewelry case, and walked her through the aisles. When it comes to antiques, the most important thing is the story. He waved his hand around the shop. Everything here has a tale to tell, and if you find it boring, you must embellish. The story is what sells. Remember that. But I don't know the stories. You will learn them. I'm an honors student, Grace, feeling overwhelmed, stumbled on the lip of the paisley carpet. Good for you, he said. What I mean is, I have a lot of studying to do. I'm not sure I can learn and remember a buttload of stories about things. Ernest pinned her with his warm brown gaze. These are not just things, and in this shop, we never use the term buttload. Grace bristled. Buttload is an actual unit of measurement used for wine. We don't have a liquor license, and we never use words that are synonymous with body parts. Seriously? Grace pointed an ivory-backed hairbrush. I guess that's just a brush? Yes. Is that a three-legged stool? Grace asked. Stool, along with any other words used to describe excrement, are especially taboo. Poo taboo. Got it. Ernest sighed and headed for the storage room, his back stiff and straight. Grace didn't know whether to follow him or not. She wasn't sure if the training, if that's what he'd call it, was over, or if he just needed a break from her. A bell above the door jangled, announcing customers. The Abercrombie and Fitch boy in the now dented red BMW walked in. Their eyes locked. You, he said, demonstrating his brilliant and poetic use of the English language. You kicked my car. Grace lifted her chin. You bullied my brother. Confusion swept over his face. I did what? When? Yesterday. He was terrified and he has asthma, and in case you didn't know, running and asthma do not go well together. I didn't bully your brother, he said, planting his feet wide, folding his arms and glaring. You scratched my bumper. All the poo synonyms too dirty to be uttered in the lilac shop flooded Grace's mind. She chose to say, poor you, because poor was just poo with an R at the end. He stared open-mouthed as if he couldn't understand someone actually being rude to him, as if nothing like that had ever happened to him before. What are you doing here? He finally asked. I work here. Since when? I was given a job right after my brother had an asthma attack, thanks to you, by the way, yesterday. Who is your brother? Toby, he's 11. He shook his head. I don't remember chasing any 11-year-olds yesterday. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the last time I chased an 11-year-old, I was about that age myself. Grace tamped down her doubt. He thought you were chasing him, and I saw you running. It's not a crime to run. I do it every day. He pushed his hand through his hair, making it messier and somehow even more touchable. Grace took a deep breath and reminded herself that she did not want to touch his hair, even though she kind of did. The bell jangled a second time, and Cordelia walked in, her arms laden with packages. Oh, good. I see you two have met. Sort of, the guy growled. Grace, this is my son, Frederick Fitzwilliam Brockbank. Cordelia flashed them both warm smiles. Freddie, meet Grace. Freddie made a guttural sound and headed for the back room, probably to discuss her horribleness with Ernest. He disappeared around the corner, out of sight, but not, maybe, out of earshot. Grace wanted to ask about him, but couldn't. How would she manage to offend the one guy she would work with and the owner's son in such a short time? A sick feeling washed over her. Grace really wanted to be a nice person like Heather and her mom, but she just wasn't that good at it. But Frederick Fitzwilliam Brockbank deserved to be kicked. First off, that name. Freddie. No one under the age of 60 should be a Freddie. But that probably wasn't his fault. Or was it? And what if he hadn't been chasing Toby? He probably thought Grace was a crazy person. And maybe she was. I was right about that dress on you, Cordelia said, pulling Grace away from her negative thoughts. Cordelia twirled a finger in the air. Turn around, let me see. Grace obeyed, and the dress swirled, making her, for a brief moment, feel like a princess. A mean princess. The type of girl Grace hated. Grace tried to remember the last time she'd worn a dress. Her cousin had lent her one for their Grandpa James's funeral. It had been made from stiff black cotton and smelled like a musty basement. Grandpa James had been buried on one of those hot, wet Oregon summer days. There had been lots of relatives hugging and crying, and she'd had to do it all in a pitted-out black dress. You look beautiful, Cordelia said. Thank you, Grace replied. But you should know I don't own any dresses. I can't look like this every time I come to work. Besides, I have to ride my bike. The last thing she wanted to do was look like Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz on a bicycle in a dress, flashing Santa Magdalena views of her panties on her way to work. Cordelia tapped her chin. We'll see. Just wear whatever, but maybe a little eye makeup? She paused, reading Grace's expression. You do have makeup, don't you? Yes, Grace stuttered. Technically, she didn't have any makeup, but Heather did, and she knew Heather would share until Grace got her first paycheck and could buy her own. Good. Follow me. Cordelia directed her to a closet with a crystal-cut doorknob. Even this cleaning supply space looked like a happy work of art. Cordelia pulled a feather duster off a hook on the wall. Here you go. Have at it. The thought of dusting anything breakable terrified her, so Grace headed for the bookshelves. Hours passed and no one came in the shop. This didn't seem to bother Cordelia at all, and Grace began to wonder how Frederick Fitzwilliam Brockbank could afford to eat, let alone drive a new BMW. The bell finally jangled close to 5, and a crowd of tiny men she'd seen earlier trooped in. They wore work boots, shorts, flannel shirts, and suspenders. Most were bald, and they all had big fuzzy beards, reminding Grace of what Grandpa had said about how the good Lord only had created so many perfect heads, and the rest he had to cover with hair. He also said that as real men grew older, they didn't just lose their hair. It just migrated south. A lot of Grandpa Hank's hair had settled in his nose and his ears, but the hair on those men had taken up residence on their chin. Although, for all Grace knew, they had hair sprouting out of their noses and ears. Grace really didn't want to get close enough to find out. When they saw her, they huddled together and began to whisper. She squirmed beneath their collective speculative gazes. It's her, Grace heard one of them say. I'm not so sure, another put in. We need Charmant, another added. They're not speaking, remember? Said another. Well, they better start speaking and fast. Grace put down the duster and approached the men. Can I help you? She doesn't sound like her, one of them said slowly. At first, all of the men looked identical, but after a few minutes, Grace began to pick out subtle differences. A red nose, droopy eyes, a scowl, a furrowed eyebrow. We need an apple, the one with the worry etched between his eyebrows whispered. And with that, they all began nodding and hurried out the door. The littlest and last one dropped a leather flask. He scooped it up before slamming behind the others. Goodness, what was that all about? Cordelia asked. Grace shook her head, not knowing and not really wanting to know. After her shift, Grace went back to the dressing room to change into her jeans and t-shirt. The strange whispering began again. She glanced out the tiny window high above her head. She didn't remember it being windy, but she hadn't been outside for several hours. Shaking off the eyes on the back of her neck feeling, she left the dress on a hook and slipped off the shoes, wondering if this was how Cinderella felt at midnight when her ball gown had turned into rags. She said goodbye to Cordelia as she passed her office. Frederick Fitzwilliam Brockbank sat at the desk, his head buried in a book. He didn't look up or acknowledge her in any way. Instead of getting her bike from the back, Grace went out the front door and headed for the nearby beauty supply shop she'd spotted earlier. She paused at the window, looking in. She knew nothing about makeup, and the jars and bottles overwhelmed her. "There she is," a now familiar voice called out. Grace glanced over her shoulder and saw the flock of little men heading her way. The leader carried a bright red apple in his hand. He held it in front of him like it was a honing device, leading him onward. Grace ducked into the beauty shop. A pretty blonde with warm brown eyes and skin as smooth as cream smiled at Grace. She wore a white lab coat, but a pink and white skirt peeked out around her upper thighs, and she had on a pair of hot pink strappy heels. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes, Grace cast a furtive glance over her shoulder, wondering if the men would follow her into Belinda's beauty shop. Of course, men weren't forbidden in beauty supply stores, but it just wasn't the sort of place where manly men typically hung out. It was like finding a dude in the tampon aisle. "Do you need some makeup?" the girl prompted. "Yes," Grace breathed out, "makeup, but I can't buy anything until my next paycheck." "I get that," the girl said. "Do you want something in particular?" Grace's gaze flitted to the window. She spotted the men standing on the corner, looking hostile and determined. She wondered who they were and what they wanted and when they would leave her alone. Chapter 4. "I know nothing about makeup," Grace said, "so I really don't know what I want." The girl clapped her hands. "You want a makeover?" Did she? How long would that take? Okay. The girl scurried out from behind the counter and began pulling containers, brushes, and tubes from drawers and cupboards like Dr. Frankenstein preparing for surgery. Grace hesitated, reluctant to waste her time. "Wait, remember, I don't have any money. I can't buy anything today." The girl looked up from her collected arsenal. "That's okay. This will be fun." She waved a hand in front of Grace's face. "You're like a beautiful blank slate." If the girl's makeup had been weird or goth, Grace wouldn't have stayed, but since she was pretty, Grace figured maybe she could help her too. "My mom always says that even a barn looks better with a fresh coat of paint." The girl's hand froze above the makeup brushes and her mouth formed an O. She recovered quickly. "Sorry, that came out wrong. You're definitely not a barn. You're so thin you could be a model if you were taller." She motioned to a chair. "Take a seat." "Are you sure?" Grace cast another look at the window. The men with their bulbous nose and bushy eyebrows peered back at her. She turned her back on them. "Remember, I don't have any money." "You keep saying that. I have oodles of time with nothing to do. This is going to be great. Unless you don't want to." "No, I want to." "Maybe." Grace looked back at the window at the men. "Definitely." She settled into the chair. "Are you Belinda?" "Gabby. Belinda is my mom." Gabby dropped a black cape around Grace's shoulders and tied it behind her neck. "She's a makeup artist to the stars. I'm going to do that too, someday." "I'm Grace, and I'm going to cure cancer." "Ooh, that's way cooler," Gabby said. "And a lot less likely," Grace pointed out. Although Grace could tell Gabby wasn't the sciencey type, Gabby held up one bottle of foundation after another, searching for the perfect shade as if she was a pharmacist contemplating drugs. She debated over silky ivory and cameo cream, putting a dab of each on a makeup sponge before applying them both to Grace's cheeks. Gabby's sponge paused in front of Grace's nose. "You can't move your head." Grace held herself straight and stiff, trying to be mannequin-like. "Are you in beauty school now?" "No, I'm a junior at Mission High." Gabby smeared the foundation over Grace's skin, making her look chalky. "Oh," Grace said, wishing Gabby attended Santa Magdalena. "I'm a junior too, but I go to a private school." "Ah, have you met Brockbank?" "Probably not, right? Because you haven't even started school yet." Gabby loaded a brush with desert rose blush. Brockbank. His mom, Cordelia, owns a lilac shop." "I met Freddie," Grace said with a sigh. That's him, Gabby smirked. Freddie is his real name, a name only a mother could love. He pretty much hates me. Gabby lifted an eyebrow. Explain, please. Grace told Gabby about Brock chasing Toby and admitted that she'd kicked his car. That was before I knew he was the son of my new boss. Gabby laughed so hard the makeup brush shook and desert rose blush fell like pink snow flurries to the floor. You're working at the lilac shop? She asked after she composed herself. That's so great. I love that store. I like it too. I just wish Freddie Fitzwilliam wasn't related to Cordelia. I feel so stupid. What if he hadn't been chasing Toby? Why did you think he was? Gabby had stopped laughing, but was still smiling. She reloaded the brush with blush. Toby said someone was chasing him, and Brock and his friend were the only people I saw running. Were they wearing uniforms? Grace's mouth dropped open. What had they been wearing? Jerseys? Shorts? Gabby placed her finger beneath Grace's chin and closed her mouth. Maybe. Brock's on the cross-country team. Grace dropped her head to the counter, resting her forehead on the cool glass. I feel so stupid. Gabby patted her back. Grace sat up. It's okay. He can hate me. It's not like we would have been friends or anything. Why not? Because he's hot? So hot, like Sierra Desert hot, Gabby said. But you're beautiful too, and you'll be even more beautiful as soon as I'm done with you. But I'm not... What? Gabby demanded. Rich. That shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter, but it does. In Grace's experience, only rich people thought money didn't matter. Wait, I thought you had to be loaded to go to St. Mag's. My mom got a teaching job there. Gabby inspected the tubes of lipstick and selected two. Vampire's Kiss? She showed Grace a tube of the blood-red gloss. Or Bubblegum Yum. Grace pointed to the pinker shade. I'm going to have to apologize to him. Gabby ignored her and picked up the Vampire Kisses tube. Do this, she said, opening her mouth so that she looked like a baby bird waiting to be fed. I hate that, Grace said. Do it anyway, Gabby said with the tube suspended in air. I hate apologizing, Grace clarified. Everybody does, but this will be one apology you're definitely not going to hate. How do you know? Because I got a plan, Gabby said with a grin. Brock liked to study at the shop away from the lure of the TV, the siren call of the refrigerator, or the pull of video games. Even when the shop was open and his mom or Ernest piddled around, he found the office quiet and distraction-free. It was even better after Cordelia and Ernest left for the day, when twilight fell and the place was his own, like now. Père garçon, viens ici, a voice whispered. Brock looked up from the book spread in front of him and rubbed his forehead. Who's there? Voir garçon, viens ici, the voice repeated. Brock slowly pushed away from the desk and went to the storage room. The fluorescent light flickered over Cordelia's collection of must-haves and must-sells. He went to the showroom and clicked on the light. As he had thought, he was alone. He checked the doors, then his phone, wondering how his friends could pull this off. But none of his friends spoke French. Most, like him, were taking Spanish. Ashton was in his third year of Chinese, and Alicia was taking sign language. The whispering continued, but Brock went into the office and closed the door, suspecting this was someone's idea of a joke. He slid a glance at the back door, wondering who was in the alley laughing and waiting for him to bust through the door in a panic. They'd record it, and seconds later it'd be on 100 social media sites. Let them laugh and wait. He had to get back to his world history homework. But the whispering didn't stop. It became increasingly urgent and insistent. Brock stomped out of the office, slammed the door, and searched the room for a hidden recording device. He found the Doppel-whatever painting beneath a sheet in the dressing room. His evil twin grinned at him as if he had a secret. His lips didn't move, but the voice sounded like it came from the painting. Brock picked it up and ran his hands over the sides of the frame, but found nothing. He set it down hard and headed for the back door. Knowing the next few minutes could make his life a viral hell, he stopped at the window to peek at the alley. This required moving a stack of boxes and an 18th century bed frame. He fully expected to find a cluster of guys from the cross-country team outside the door with their phones raised for the humiliating video. The alley was dark and deserted. Without turning on the lights, Brock went to the showroom. The display windows held vases of flowers. In the upcoming weeks, Cordelia would change out the flowers for autumn leaves, hay bundles, and sunflowers. The sidewalk looked quiet and cross-country team-free. A few kids carrying ice cream cones from North Pole noshes walked past. A couple leading a poodle headed for the grocery store. Feeling ill, Brock gathered up his books, locked the shop, and headed home. Chapter 5. The next morning, when Gabby pulled her Mini Cooper in front of Grace's grandparents' house, Grace grabbed her towel and beach bag, slipped her feet into flip-flops, and headed out the door. Gabby met her on the walkway. "Not so fast," she said, putting her hand on Grace's shoulder to stop her. "We gotta do your makeup." "Makeup? We're going to the beach." "I knew you'd say that. That's why I brought my big guns." Gabby showed Grace her makeup case. "It's all waterproof." Wrapping her arm through Grace's, she led her to the front door. "I thought you said you weren't loaded," Gabby said as they stepped inside. Grace dropped her voice to a whisper. "My family is not as rich as my grandfather, and my parents are super proud about accepting help." Gabby bit her lip and gazed around at the spacious living room, soaring ceilings, two-story windows, and threadbare 1960s furniture. "Doesn't really add up. If your parents won't take help, why are you living here?" "I think if you knew my grandfather, you'd understand. Besides, technically, we're helping my grandparents. Grandma can't do the cleaning and cooking, and Grandpa is too cheap to hire someone and too chauvinistic to do it himself. And they can't drive anymore. They really shouldn't be living alone, so..." "Here you are?" Gabby asked. Grace hung her head. Gabby bumped her with her shoulder. "Don't be so down. You're here. We're friends. Brock's here." "I told you, Brock hates me." "Who's Brock?" Heather appeared at the top of the stairs. She carried a basket of laundry in her arms. Grace introduced her to Gabby. The laundry pricked Grace's guilt. "You should come to the beach with us," she told her sister. "No thanks. Besides, I can't. Remember? You're wearing my suit." "I'll change." Heather shook her head and headed for the laundry room. "I gotta stay here and fix the grand unit's lunch." "Next time," Grace told Heather's retreating back. "It's so not fair," she told Gabby, leading her into the downstairs powder room. "My grandpa treats us like we're slaves." "But you do get to live in this mansion." Gabby set down the makeup case and pulled out a tube of foundation. "This mansion, as you call it, was built by my great-grandfather, and it's falling down around her ears. The plumbing is ancient and it moans, so if you have to pee in the middle of the night, you can't flush because it wakes everyone up. The kitchen was last remodeled in the 1960s, and the bathrooms are just as old." "I bet there's some cool stuff here. You could probably sell some of it on eBay." Gabby brushed toner onto Grace's cheeks, nose, and forehead and chin. "My grandparents won't sell anything." Grace stared at her own reflection in the mirror. She didn't look as made up as she had yesterday, but she still looked good, really good. "Let me see the swimsuit," Gabby said. "No, you'll see it soon enough." "Does it show lots of skin?" "No one wants to see my skin. It's white. I'm from Oregon. Not that I'd be a different color if I lived here." "You do live here," Gabby said. "Temporarily." And that is the end of episode 2. Thanks for coming. If you want to read the book, it's free on Amazon. You can read The Invisible Maid on the Kindle Vella platform. And if you like the story and you want to find out what happens next, hit subscribe and like, and stay tuned.